When did you witness someone getting exactly what they deserved? I'd been a flight attendant for 14 years. The thing about being a flight attendant is that you see the same kind of man over and over. On a Tuesday in October, on a 6-hour transcon, my kind of man was in 2B first class. Aisle, mid-50s, wedding ring. The kind of polished entitlement that wore expensive shoes and treated everyone in a uniform like a vending machine. His name on the manifest was Reginald. Reginald was the kind of passenger who was rude to me with one breath and warm to the woman in 2A with the next. The woman in 2A was not his wife. She was wearing a wedding band that did not match his. She was maybe 30. I wasn't judging the affair. I was judging the way Reginald was treating my coworker Innocencia for asking him gently to put his seatbelt on during turbulence. Sweetheart, I fly more than you walk. I'll tell your supervisor what your name is. Is that what you want? Get me a real flight attendant who knows what she's doing. Innocencia kept her face perfect, walked back to the galley, took a breath, told me quietly, I'm fine, he's just a guy. But here's the thing about a 6-hour flight. A man like Reginald cannot, for 6 hours, stop being himself. 2 hours in, Reginald ordered his third drink, loudly, then complained the rim of his glass was dirty, then told Innocencia, when she replaced it, you people really need to take more pride in your work. The woman in 2A laughed politely. 3 hours in, Reginald got up to use the lavatory. He brushed past Innocencia in a way that wasn't an accident. Innocencia finally came to me, quietly, told me what happened. Document it, right now, with me. We logged it in the in-flight system as it was happening. Date, time, seat, witness, which was me. The system forwarded to ground crew and corporate. But here's the thing about a 6-hour flight, part 2. 4 hours in, Reginald made his real mistake. He fell asleep. The woman in 2A was not asleep. She gently waved me over and asked, in a low voice, if I could help her. She told me she'd been recording him, on her phone, the whole flight, that she was not his girlfriend, that she was a private investigator, that she'd been hired by Reginald's wife 3 months ago, that she was not on this flight by coincidence, that she'd booked her ticket specifically when she confirmed Reginald's, that her audio recording, 10 feet from the man for 4 hours, had caught every word he'd been saying, to his wife, to his colleagues he'd called from his seat, to Innocencia, to me, that she was happy to provide a clean copy to the airline if it would help. The dumber he thinks we are, the more rope he'll hand us. I kept my face perfect, told her gently that I could not coordinate that, but that she should know our in-flight team was already documenting from our end, that whatever she did with her recording was up to her. The woman in 2A thanked me, then she smiled and went back to her crossword. The flight landed. Reginald got off smug, telling Innocencia, you should really think about a different career on the way out. What Reginald didn't know as he walked up the jetway was that the airline was already flagging him in their system, that the recording from the woman in 2A was filed that same evening as part of a divorce action filed by his wife the very next day, that his wife was not a casual party, that his wife was a senior partner at a law firm, that her firm represented one of Reginald's biggest clients, that the in-flight audio documented Reginald using his client's name in a way that put him in violation of his client confidentiality agreement on a public flight where private investigators could record him. That client terminated Reginald's contract within the month. The airline, separately, banned him from our carrier and partner alliance carriers for 2 years. The divorce was not favorable. 3 things gone, in 8 weeks, that he'd been earning back for years, all because he could not, for 6 hours, stop being himself in front of a woman he'd mistaken for an audience. But here's the thing. Innocencia received, through HR, a small commendation for her professionalism. On the form, she listed her witness, me, then a second witness, the woman in 2A, who mailed Innocencia and me, a month later, a handwritten card, thanking us for our discretion. But the postscript was the part I hadn't expected. The woman in 2A wrote, I didn't tell you everything. The wife who hired me didn't know who he was when she married him. He was a different man, with a different name, 20 years ago. I found 2 other ex-wives. They were never legally divorced from him. He's still married to all 3 of them, including her. If you ever need to verify anything for your records, my office is here. I read that postscript 3 times, sitting on my couch with the card in both hands and the TV on mute and my coffee getting cold. 3 women, still legally married to all 3. Different names, different lives. I put the card down, I picked it up, I read it again. I told myself it was not my business. I told myself I was a flight attendant, not a detective, not a lawyer. I filed the card in my kitchen drawer, the one with the takeout menus and the expired coupons and the spare batteries. I closed the drawer, I flew my routes, I smiled at passengers, I did my safety checks. I came home and did not open the drawer. I saw Innocencia at work. We worked 2 flights together that week. We talked about normal things, scheduling, catering nobody liked. We did not talk about Reginald. We did not talk about the card. We did not talk about the woman in 2A, whose name I now knew was Katarzyna, whose business card was sitting in my junk drawer with a postscript I could not stop thinking about, even though I was trying very hard to stop. I had convinced myself it was over. The flight happened, the report was filed, the man lost his client and his airline privileges and his dignity, and that was that. I was wrong. 2 weeks after the card arrived, Innocencia pulled me aside in the galley during a flight to the West Coast. We were over the middle of the country, cabin lights dimmed, most of first class asleep. Innocencia had a look on her face I'd never seen. Not scared, careful, like she was choosing every word before she said it. She leaned close and said quietly, a man called the airline and asked for me by name. He said he wanted to apologize for how he acted on the flight. He said he was going through a hard time. He asked if I'd be willing to speak with him privately. My whole body went tight. I looked at Innocencia and said, did you talk to him? Innocencia shook her head. No, but he knew things. He knew my schedule. He knew I was working this route today. That was the moment I understood. Reginald was not retreating. The apology was not an apology. The apology was reconnaissance. He was calling pretending to be sorry so he could figure out what we'd shared, what the investigator had on him, how exposed he was. He wanted to talk to Innocencia privately because she was the one he'd pushed around, the one he thought was weak, the one he figured would be easy to get information from if he turned on the charm. He was wrong about Innocencia. He'd always been wrong about Innocencia. But the fact that he knew her name, her schedule, her route, that told me something. This man was not done. This man was working. This man had a plan, and the plan was to figure out how bad things were and then make them go away, the same way he'd probably made things go go away his whole life. I went home that night. I stood in my kitchen for a long time. I opened the drawer. The card was right where I left it. I picked it up. I looked at the number. I told myself one more time that this was not my business. It did not work this time, because the moment Inocencia told me he knew her schedule, it became my business. A man who tracks down the flight attendant he mistreated and pretends to want forgiveness is not a man who is sorry. That is a man who is dangerous. I called the number on Katarzina's card. She picked up on the second ring, like she'd been waiting. The first thing she said was, "I was hoping you'd call." I did not do small talk. I said, "How much trouble is he in?" Katarzina was quiet for half a second, then said, "More than he knows, but I need help from someone he doesn't see coming." I understood something I'd been trying not to understand for 2 weeks. This was not over. The flight, the divorce, the lost client, the airline ban, all of that was just the first layer. Underneath it was something much bigger, something with 3 women's names attached to it. Reginald thought he was already managing the damage. He had no idea that the woman he'd snapped his fingers at for a drink refill was standing in her kitchen, deciding to help take apart everything he'd ever built. I said, "Tell me what you need." Katarzina picked a coffee shop 10 minutes from the airport, the kind of place where crew grabbed drinks between layovers, plastic tables, bad lighting, nobody paying attention to anybody. I got there first. Katarzina walked in at exactly the time she said she would, and she looked different than she had on the plane. On the plane, she'd been playing a role. Sitting across from me now, she looked like someone who had not slept much in the past month. She sat down, put a folder on the table, and did not waste a single second. Kaylin filed for divorce the day after the flight. You already know that, but here's what you don't know. The divorce opened up his financial records, and the records didn't add up. She opened the folder. I am not a lawyer. I am not an accountant. I am a person who hands out warm towels and makes sure exit rows understand their responsibilities. But even I could see what she was pointing at. Payments going to addresses in different states. Accounts that did not have Kaylin's name on them. Tax filings that listed dependents who did not exist in Kaylin's household. Katarzina said, "I followed the money. You follow the money, and the money tells you where the other lives are. The other lives." She said it calm, like she was telling me about a connecting flight. She told me there were 2 other women. The first was named Priya. The second was named Zoya. Neither knew about the other. Neither knew about Kaylin. Neither had ever been legally divorced from Reginald. He married Kaylin while still legally married to both of them. I sat there with my cold coffee and tried to make my brain fit around that. 3 women, 3 marriages. None of them ended properly. All of them real on paper. Katarzina watched me processing it and said, "Kaylin's lawyers can handle the divorce. They're good. She'll be fine. But Priya and Zoya don't have lawyers. They don't even know each other exists. Priya thinks she's been divorced for 12 years. She signed papers. She built a whole new life thinking it was done." She paused. "Zoya thinks she was abandoned. He just disappeared on her. No forwarding address. No final papers. Neither of them knows they're still legally his wife." I sat with that for 15 seconds where I could feel every single one pass. 2 women out there, living their lives, maybe trying to buy a house or get a loan, and they did not know that on paper, in a courthouse filing system, they were still married to a man who'd thrown them away like old luggage. I looked at Katarzina and said, "What can I do?" She closed the folder. She looked at me and said, "I need a witness. Someone who can place his character on the record. Not his wife, not his ex-wives, not someone with a personal stake. I need a professional. Someone who saw the real Reginald when he thought nobody important was watching." She let that sit there. Nobody important. Because that was how Reginald saw us. That was how he saw every person in a uniform who existed to make his life more comfortable. We were furniture to him. Katarzina said, "The in-flight report you filed is timestamped, corporate verified, entered into a system with protocols and audit trails. That makes it admissible. And it's the only piece of evidence that comes from someone with zero personal connection to Reginald or any of his wives. You didn't know who he was. You just watched him be cruel to your coworker, and you wrote it down." I understood what she was asking. I also understood what it could cost me. I said, "I could lose my job if this looks like I'm personally involved in a passenger's legal case." I meant it. 14 years, early mornings and red eyes and holidays away from home and smiling at people who snapped their fingers at me. 14 years of building a career that let me pay my rent and feel like I was good at something. Katarzina did not push. She just said, "You already filed the report. You already witnessed it. So that all I'm asking is that you don't let him make it disappear." I said, "What do you mean make it disappear?" She leaned back. She said, "Reginald has already filed a formal complaint against the airline about that flight." My hand tightened around my cup. She said, "He's claiming he was harassed by the crew. He's saying the documentation was filed maliciously. He's saying one of the flight attendants coordinated with an unauthorized third party to surveil him on the aircraft. He wants the report pulled from the system. He wants it gone." I felt something go through me I cannot fully describe. It was not fear. It was the feeling you get when you realize someone is not just lying. They are trying to rewrite what happened, trying to reach back in time and change the record so the truth never existed. Reginald grabbed Inocencia. Reginald called her names. Reginald treated her like nothing, on a plane full of witnesses, while being recorded by a private investigator he did not even know was there. And now he was filing paperwork to say it never happened. Katarzina said, "If he gets that report pulled, it changes everything. Kaylin's divorce becomes a regular split. No fraud angle, no pattern on record. Priya and Zoya stay in the dark. And the one piece of independent evidence that shows who Reginald really is, the one document that wasn't created by a wife or a lawyer, just goes away." She looked at me. She said, "Your silence becomes his shield." I sat there. The coffee shop was loud. Someone grinding beans. A pilot 2 tables over laughing at his phone. The world just going on. But in my head, I was seeing Inocencia's face in the galley, hearing her say, "I'm fine. He's just a guy." Remembering how she kept her face perfect. And now he was trying to erase the proof that any of it ever happened. I did not say yes right away, but I did not say no. What I said was, "Tell me everything, from the beginning. All of it." 3 days after the coffee shop, I got called into a meeting. My supervisor. A small office near the crew lounge. Gray carpet, fluorescent lights that buzzed too loud. He was already sitting behind his desk with his hands folded and a printed stack of paper, and a look like he was about to deliver bad news to someone he actually liked. He told me to sit. He said the airline had received a formal complaint from a passenger, Reginald. Of course it was Reginald. He laid it out. Reginald claimed the crew had targeted him, that the documentation was fabricated, that a crew member member, which was me, had coordinated with an unauthorized third party to surveil him. He was talking about Katarzyna. He was saying I helped her spy on him. He was threatening legal action. I sat in that chair and listened to my supervisor read pieces of this out loud, and every sentence was a lie written in careful legal language that makes lies sound reasonable. He put the paper down. He looked at me. He said, "I believe you." Then he said the word I was waiting for. But, he said, corporate wants this to go away quietly. They're considering pulling the report from the system and issuing him an apology letter. I felt my hands go flat on the armrests. I said, he grabbed my coworker. He threatened her. I documented it in real time. Every word is true. My voice was steady. I was not. Inside, I was shaking because I'd spent 14 years trusting that when you followed protocol, when you documented and reported, the system would hold. My supervisor nodded. He said, I know, but he's got a lawyer now, and we're an airline, not a courtroom. He said it like he was sorry. He was sorry. Being sorry does not change anything when the decision comes from people 3 levels above you in a building you've never been inside. I walked out and went to find Inocencia. I did not have to. She found me. She was waiting in the crew lounge by the vending machines, and she already knew. She looked at me and said, they're really going to pull it, aren't they? I sat down next to her. I said, they're thinking about it. Inocencia was quiet a few seconds. Then she said something I have not forgotten. She said, if they pull it, it's like it never happened, and he knows that. That's why he filed the complaint. He's not trying to win. He's trying to erase. She was right. Reginald did not care about an apology. He cared about making the record go away, because if the record goes away, there is no proof. And if there is no proof, there is no pattern. And if there is no pattern, then he is just a man going through a messy divorce, not a man who treats people like garbage whenever he thinks nobody with power is watching. I went home that night and called Katarzyna. I told her everything. The meeting, the complaint, corporate considering pulling the report. Katarzyna listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet about 2 seconds. Then she said, he's done this before. Her voice was calm, but it was the calm that comes from being angry a very long time and learning how to hold it flat. She said, with Priya, he got her landlord to retract a noise complaint she filed. She'd called about him banging on her door at 2 in the morning, and by the end of the week, the landlord told her it was a misunderstanding and took the report out of the file. She paused. With Zoya, he convinced her therapist she was exaggerating. He showed up at a joint session, all charm, all concern, and by the time he left, the therapist was questioning whether Zoya's version was accurate. Katarzyna said, he doesn't go after the people. He goes after the evidence. He makes it disappear, and once it's gone, it's his word against theirs, and he has spent his whole life making sure his word sounds better. I was standing in my kitchen again, the same drawer, the same spot where I'd stood 2 weeks ago deciding whether to call, but I was not the same person. I was not scared of losing my job anymore. I was scared of what would happen if I let a man like Reginald reach into a corporate system and pull out the truth like a loose thread, and nobody stopped him. I said, Katarzyna, I need to tell you something. She waited. I said, I saved a personal copy of the report before I filed it, time-stamped on my phone, screenshots of every entry, every note Inocencia and I logged during the flight. If corporate pulls it from the system, the original still exists. On my phone, in my cloud backup. It's not going anywhere. Katarzyna was quiet a moment. Then she said, good. She said it like a door closing. Firm. Final. Then she said, because Kaylin's legal team is filing a bigamy motion next week, and your documentation is the only independent record of who he is when he thinks he's untouchable. The only independent record. Not a wife's testimony, not an investigator's recording. My report was written by a flight attendant doing her job, time-stamped by a corporate system, witnessed by a coworker who had no idea who Reginald was. It was clean. It was real. And Reginald knew that, which is exactly why he was trying so hard to destroy it. I told Katarzyna I was in. The next day, I told Inocencia everything. Not in the galley. We sat in my car in the employee lot after our shift, engine running, heat on because the evenings were getting cold. I told her about Priya and Zoya, the bigamy, the complaint, what corporate was thinking about doing, the copy on my phone. Inocencia looked out the windshield at the planes taxiing in the distance. Then she turned to me and said, he doesn't get to call me a liar and walk away. Her voice was not loud. It was the kind of quiet that is heavier than yelling. She said, I'll stand as a witness. I'll say what he did and how he touched me. He does not get to erase me. That night, Inocencia and I sent our personal copies directly to Kaylin's legal team through Katarzyna, outside the airline system, outside anything corporate could touch or bury. We both knew there was no going back. Kaylin's team filed the bigamy motion the following week. The court documents named Priya and Zoya by their full names. Katarzyna made the calls. Priya lived 3 states away. When Katarzyna explained why she was calling, Priya said, I don't understand. We divorced in 2011. I signed papers. Katarzyna told her, the papers you signed were never filed. You're still legally married to him. Zoya's reaction was different. Zoya said, I always knew something was wrong. He vanished. No forwarding address, no final papers. Katarzyna told her, it wasn't done, and you're not the only one. Then Reginald did something nobody expected. He got served, and instead of calling his lawyer, he called Priya directly. Soft-voiced, gentle, full of apologies. He said, they're trying to drag you into something ugly. If you just sign a statement saying we separated amicably, this all goes away for both of us. Priya almost agreed. She called Katarzyna after and said, he sounded so sincere. He sounded like the man I married. Katarzyna did not argue with her. What she did was play her a piece of the in-flight audio. The part where Reginald was on the phone with a colleague at 30,000 feet, laughing, saying, my wife thinks she's smart, but she married me, didn't she? That tells you everything. Priya went silent. Then she said, send me whatever I need to sign for the real filing. Zoya, on her own, sent Katarzyna old financial records, bank statements showing accounts Reginald had opened in her name that she never authorized. That added fraud to the case. The court hearing happened on a Thursday. I was not there. I was working a flight, pushing a beverage cart down an aisle and smiling at strangers while somewhere in a courtroom 3 states away, Reginald's whole life was falling apart. Katarzyna called me that evening. I said, what happened? She said, he showed up in a nice suit, calm, charming. He told the judge it was a misunderstanding, a clerical error, that he loved his wife and wanted to work things out. I said, and then? Katarzyna said, and then the judge asked which wife, and his lawyer put his head in his hands. Our airline report, the one corporate tried to pull, the one Reginald filed a complaint to destroy, was entered into evidence evidence as a character exhibit. The judge noted it was filed in real time by 2 crew members with no personal connection to any of the parties. Reginald's claim that it was fabricated fell apart. The judge referenced the report specifically when denying Reginald's request to seal the proceedings. The report that a man in a nice suit tried to erase was now part of the public record forever. Reginald was referred to the district attorney's office for investigation of bigamy and fraud. The divorce was granted to Kaylin on terms that left Reginald with almost nothing. Both Priya and Zoya filed for annulment and civil damages. 3 women, 3 lives he thought he could juggle and discard. And it all came down because he could not, for 6 hours on a Tuesday in October, stop being himself. 2 weeks after the hearing, Innocencia got a letter from the airline. Not a commendation this time, an actual apology, in writing, for considering the retraction of her report. She showed it to me in the crew lounge, read it twice, then said she was going to frame it. She put it in her locker, right next to her schedule and her spare lipstick. Months later, I got one final message from Katarzyna. It was short. Priya is doing well. Zoya moved closer to her family. Kaylin says thank you. You didn't have to call me back, but you did. P.S. There's a 4th marriage license, filed 11 years ago. The bride's maiden name is the same as yours, and the city listed is the one you grew up in.